What is going on, guys? This is Crozen, and welcome back to another Oblivion Remastered video. This time we are on the Pure Mage build. So I feel like Pure Mages overall are a little bit overlooked because everybody wants to play a spell sword, and in my opinion, Pure Mages are just a little bit better. I mean, they just have a little bit more flair, they have a little bit more creativity to them, and you could basically do anything with all the schools of magic in this game. So let's take a look at the build. So beginning with our race and our class, we really have two options for whatever race we want to be as a pure mage. You can either select High Elf or Breton, and High Elves are going to start with more magicka, but Bretons are going to have way better defenses against magic. So it's really going to be personal choice. Because I always choose Breton with a lot of my builds, I go High Elf here. As far as the origin goes, I recommend going with Auradon over Somerset Isle because you're going to start with 40 endurance versus 30, so more health is always going to be better for mages. As far as the class, this is going to be one of the rare instances where going with the pre-made class is just as good as selecting your own custom class. So just go ahead and select the mage. You're going to have the right specialization in magic, you're going to have the good favorite attributes with intelligence and willpower, and all of your major skills are going to be magic skills, which is perfect for a pure mage. For the birth sign, you really have two options, and the safest option and the option that I always choose is going to be the mage. This just gives us a plus 50 magicka with no downsides, so this is the way that I always go. If you want to get a little bit more creative, you can go with the Atronach, but the biggest downside is you cannot regenerate magicka, and that's a big part of how I play. So if you want to go with the Atronach, you can, but if you want to go for a safer option, then just pick the mage. So for the attribute level path, I go by priority, and in this case I go with the 5-5-2 method, and I put 5 points in intelligence and willpower every level, and then once intelligence is maxed out, you can start leveling up your speed, because speed will get you further distances away from the enemies, so that's always going to be important as well. After that, I do prioritize strength because of carry weight, and then at that point you're free to just go with agility and luck, and wrap up your build. And at level 30, your build is pretty much done at this point, and this is how your attributes are going to look. So now we could go over the equipment for our pure mage, and we're going to begin with the weapons, and the good news is that we will not have to enchant our own weapon this time. We're simply going to use one of the best staffs in the game, which is the Apotheosis. So what we want to do here is just go over to the Imperial City Market District and go visit our boy Rindir at Rindir Staffs, and he actually has the Apotheosis for sale for roughly around 5,800 gold. Another staff that I highly recommend is going to be the Mage's Staff, and you can turn this into the Paralysis version, and the highest leveled version is actually going to paralyze enemies for 8 seconds, but when you apply weakness to magic first, you can actually start paralyzing enemies for 16 seconds, which is really just ridiculous. Another option you have is the Staff of Indaris, and this is really good for the shock damage, but the Apotheosis staff is just better overall. Keep in mind that the Staff of Indaris is also a leveled item, so you're going to have to wait until level 25 to get the 70 points of shock damage, but the main advantage that this staff has over Apotheosis is it has more charges. I still suggest that you do the Mages Guild recommendations as early as you can, or simply just buy the Altar of Enchanting and the Spellcrafting Altar at the Wizard's Tower, because we still will need those, especially early on in the game. So the best clothing enchants are going to come from Transcendent Sigil Stones that you can get from taking on Oblivion Gates at level 17 or higher, so be sure to look out for those defensive effects for the Fortify Magicka, because we're going to be using a whole bunch of those. You should also be on the lookout for the Fire Shield, Frost Shield, Shock Shield effects, because those are going to give us armor rating. So as you can see, my character right now has 0, which is not good for a mage, but we're going to have 75 if we get 3 of these effects. So the best enchants for our clothing are going to be those Fortify Magicka enchants. You're going to want to stack as many of those as you can. So I like to put those on my shirt, my shoes, my wrist irons, also both rings and my amulet. Also, try to save those wrist irons that you get at the very beginning of the game, because those are the only gloves that you can enchant that are unarmored. Now you will be able to find an additional one in the Shivering Isles and also in the Mehrunes Razor DLC. However, it's always best to have as many of these as you can. So for the last 3 pieces of my gear, what I do in this situation is I use those Fire, Frost, and Shock Shield effects that you can get from the Transcendent Sigil Stones, or you can simply just enchant your own lesser versions prior to level 17. And not only will this give you elemental shield for those specific elements, but you're also going to raise up your armor rating. So the armor rating cap is 85, and if you get 3 of these, you're going to have 75 armor rating, which is very good. You're basically going to be resistant to a lot of physical damage. And also do note that we can add an effect to a shield, and that's just going to give us an extra enchant. As long as we don't have a one-handed weapon out, we're going to still have 100% spell effectiveness. So obviously you're not going to have the best enchants until level 17, so what you can do before then is just buy a lot of grand soul gems and enchant your own clothing, so you can go for effects like Fortify Magicka and you can get 24 points that way, which is very good early game, and you could do the same thing for the Fire, Frost, and Shock shields. So we do have some alternatives, and these are mainly for the rings and the amulets. So you can go for Sorcerer's Ring, which will give you spell absorption as well as Fortify Magicka. Spell Drinker Amulet, another very good effect with spell absorption. You also have Necklace of Swords. This really isn't going to be useful for the blade effect, but you will get reflect damage, and that's probably one of the most OP effects in the game. And if you get near the end of the main quest at level 22 or higher, you will have access to the Mundane Ring, and this has 2 very good effects with Reflect Spell and Resist Magic. So if you did start as a Breton, this will get you to 100% Resist Magic, which is very overpowered. Now you can still use this on your High Elf, and it's actually very good for them too, because the biggest weakness to High Elves is definitely magic, and you guys will see that if you do play as a High Elf. So the Mundane Ring is a very good defensive ring that you can use later on in the game. So my favorite thing about Pure Mages are the custom-made spells, so let's go over a couple of those. So the first spell that I have here is called Willpower Boost. You guys will probably remember this from the rest of my builds. It's basically just a Fortify Willpower 100 points for 70 seconds, as that's roughly around half of my magicka. Now you could play around with the duration. I recommend at least 60 seconds, but the whole idea behind this spell is that you regenerate your magicka very quickly with this on, and you could do the same thing with a lot of the effects from alchemy potions if you're into that too. So I do use 3 main destruction spells with this. So the first one will be Stunlock, and this is a ranged AoE spell. This is mainly used to debuff the enemies as well as CC them with Paralyze. So 10 feet for all of these effects. So we got Paralysis for 1 second, Fire, Frost, Shock damage, Drain health 100 points. We also got Soul Trap added to this for 5 seconds in case I want to recharge my staff. And then Weakness to Fire, Frost, and Shock 100% for 4 seconds. And then I end off with Weakness to Magic 100% for 5 seconds. So always pay attention to the order whenever you create these custom spells, and put the Weakness to Elements last, ending with Weakness to Magic. And what this will do is it'll debuff the enemies on the first cast, and so after that first cast, anything that you do will do more damage. I also have a more powerful ranged spell called Erased, which is an amazing anime by the way, and what this will do is it will apply Fire, Frost, and Shock damage 10 feet for 2 seconds, so it's a very powerful spell with 30 points in each one of those categories. Also drain health 100 points for 2 seconds, and then I add Soul Trap at the end for 2 seconds. So basically what this is a very powerful spell that will deal 280 points of damage, and this is a spell that you would use right after you use Stunlock, and you have them weakened with all of those elemental and magic effects. So for my go-to touch spell, this is going to be a spell that I created called Soul Obliterate, and this spell deals 200 points of damage with fire damage, frost, and shock for 30 points each. Also absorb health 10 points, drain health 100 points for 1 second as well. I also added Soul Trap 3 seconds, weakness to fire, frost, and shock 100% for 4 seconds, and then weakness to magic 100% 5 seconds. So another really cool spell that we have here is a spell called and if you guys have played WoW, then you know what that means, and it's essentially that. It's a spell that we would use whenever we run out of magicka. So if I just go ahead and drain my magicka here with one of my most powerful spells, then we can go ahead and use a spell called and what this will do is it'll actually restore a little bit of your magicka by fortifying it. So it's a drain intelligence on self 100 points for 1 second, drain magicka on self 3 points for 120 seconds. So my magicka right now is at 832, which I'm normally only at 650. The nice thing about this spell is that we can keep reusing it and it'll actually keep stacking your magicka. So if I go ahead and drain my magicka for a second time, what will end up happening whenever we cast this spell is that we will be even further enhanced with more magicka. So if I go into my character now, my character now has 980 magicka. So this effect can just keep on stacking and you could get over 1,000 magicka. So it's very nice to have, and it really defeats the purpose of having any kind of restore magicka potions. Now the problem with this spell is that you have to be very careful of having low magicka whenever this duration ends, which is 2 minutes. So if that does happen, you will end up with negative magicka, which is basically stunted magicka, and you will have to drink a potion or two in order to start regenerating your magicka again. So just something to keep in mind whenever you do use this. I also have a really cool conjuration, illusion, and alteration spell all in one called Frost Atronach Command, and what this will do is it'll actually command a creature or a humanoid on target. It'll also summon a Frost Atronach, it'll turn me invisible for 3 seconds, and it will apply all the elemental shields and get me to that armor cap of 85. So if we take a further look at what this spell does, it actually has command creature and humanoid on target for 2 seconds level 25, which is the max level. However, with 100% spell effectiveness, it means that we can command anything in the game. We also have summon Frost Atronach for 40 seconds, fire shield 4%, Frost Shield 3%, Shock Shield 3%, all for 40 seconds. That's to give me 10% for the armor cap. And then invisibility at the very end for 3 seconds. That way we get that aggro off of us and onto our Frost Atronach. I also have a basic healing spell which is not on my hotkey, which is called A Refreshment, and I called it that because it's in alphabetical order, so it's very easy to find at the very top of the list here. And you guys are used to this spell from my other builds. Restore health 100 points for 2 seconds, also fortify willpower 100 points for 7 seconds, and that willpower will stack with the willpower boost spell, so it's going to regenerate your magicka very quickly after you cast this. The last spell that you see here on my hotkey is Beast of Burden, and this is basically just a 100 alteration spell for Feather, which you can purchase, and this is Feather 250 points, 360 seconds, which is the best single feather spell in the game. So once you hit 75 alteration, you're better off just purchasing these at the vendors, but prior to that, you can create your own feather spell for 100 points, and that's going to be helpful for the entire game. So now we could get into the combat tips, and there are a lot of things to go over, so stick around. So one spell you should get in the habit of using is going to be Willpower Boost. Go ahead and just cast this right before you go into a dungeon, and always try to refresh it before it runs out, as this is going to drastically improve your magicka regeneration. As far as spell combinations, you can just spam Soul Obliterate when you are in melee range, and this is a very efficient spell that's going to deal more damage with each cast. You also can use Stunlock from afar and then run in and use your Soul Obliterate, and that's also going to deal a lot of damage because the enemy will be weak from the initial cast. And one of my favorite combinations is going in a Stunlock and then going into a more powerful spell like Erased, and you will start to see enemies go flying. You can even just spam the Stunlock spell, and it's not going to deal a lot of damage, but it's going to do exactly what I called it. And if you're like me and you don't like to use a lot of potions, you can use that spell that I showed you, and this works out perfectly, especially when you are in combat. You don't have to go in your inventory and go looking for potions. You could just go right back into the fight. Another option you have is using your staff, and you can get good damage out of this by going into the Stunlock spell first, or any kind of spell that has weakness on it, and then start using your staff. Another very important item that I recommend for all builds is going to be Azora Star, as this is a very efficient and easy way in order to recharge your weapon, and in this case, our staff. And when you are outnumbered, one spell that you can use is that Frost Atronach command spell that I showed you guys, and this spell does a lot of interesting things all in one, and that's really what I love about that spell. Not only can we command somebody, but we can also get our own Frost Atronach out. We can turn invisible for a short while too to try to get aggro off of us. Very excellent spell. So thank you guys for watching to the end, and I hope you enjoyed this Pure Mage build, and I hope you learned something in the process. And yeah, magic in this game is just so much fun, and in my opinion, it's the peak of Elder Scrolls because you can make your own custom spells, and there's so much creativity in that. So thank you guys again, and let me know what other types of builds you want to see, and I will see you in the next video.